Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another Axel 72 video, and in today's video I'm going to be giving my prediction for the Darren Till versus Darren Stewart fight. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into it. So obviously, if you've never seen me do a Misfits card prediction before, I have done predictions for every single one of the Misfits cards, but the way that I do it is a little bit different. I always make sure to go through the entire card, not always give the most in-depth of analysis for each fight, just because I don't really know too much about a lot of the fighters. For quite a few of the fighters, Misfits is the opportunity to get them into boxing, and it's not always positive. It's not always the best of boxing, but it shouldn't be frowned upon. I think it's entertainment. It's definitely, as all kind of true boxing fans understand, it is something completely different to professional boxing. But for the most part, there is some good talent in there as well mixed in, and we'll be showing through that today. Like I said, I'll be giving a prediction for each and every one of the fights on this card, which, to be fair, is a pretty stacked card. And I think because Misfits do have a lot of people who, want to fight for them, a lot of influencers want to, get given the opportunity. They're not always the biggest of influencers, they're not always the most biggest of names, but they are willing to give them opportunities. So I respect that, but it also means that, if they're not the biggest of names, and we have to, find somebody who's good enough to headline, and we have that with Darren Till, but it's not a crazily, big opponent, a crazily big, well-known name that he's in against. So they've stacked out the card with lots of different fights, some arguably quite good, well matched up fights, some in which perhaps might not be, but still, like I say, it's giving fighters opportunities. And like I say, with perhaps some of the fights, like I say, not being the biggest of fights, especially the main event and the co-main, it means that, like I say, they've had to stack up the card a bit more, because there has been a few events in recent times with Misfits where they've not stacked out the events enough, and they've just kind of been quite poor events. I mean, I think back to the Fox to G card the last time that he fought, that wasn't the best of events, and the Elbrook Jenny Savage one wasn't the best of events. But yeah, so there has been a few, but like I say, they can have a few cards a year where they have their standout big names, like now an Anisan Gibb or a KSI on them, but they can only go through that a few times a year. So they have to find these other stars, work them up, and put them on shows with, like I say, stacked undercards as well. So we'll start by going through, and we'll start with the main event. So Darren Till is making his return versus Darren Stewart. It is a ex-UFC fighter versus ex-UFC fighter fighting in boxing showdown, and Darren Till showcased an excellent performance against, in his last fight against Anthony Taylor, where he really dominated. He knocked him down on multiple occasions. He looked massive for the weight, to be fair to him. But as soon as he landed on Anthony Taylor, it looked like Taylor just couldn't handle it at all. And so it's no surprise where, he did do really well to fend through it, but he did inevitably get stopped. And I thought that Anthony Taylor would actually be able to win that fight, because I thought he'd be able to get up in close and cause Till problems. But I didn't realise, like I say, the sheer size difference. And like I say, Till looked like he had power. And to be fair, I think I enjoyed the fact that he was able to keep his hands up well. He boxed like an ordinary, typical kind of boxer with the good solid fundamentals. Like I say, finding his base well, controlling the center of the ring, not getting too greedy, coming in and out for the most part. And he did, like I say, look quite good. And his timing was relatively good as well. The uppercut that he landed to get, I believe it was the first knockdown, was a really nicely timed shot. So he is showcasing that he can box well, and that was something in which, of course, a lot of people had questions for, because he's a great talker, and he's really funny to watch talk on the mic, but he's not all like, we've not always seen him been able to back that up in the UFC. So like I said, we weren't too sure how he would be looking coming into boxing, and especially into Misfits, because he has the capabilities to be a real star. And I think he's coming into his own now, and he's in against Darren Stewart, who, like I say, is a former UFC fighter himself. He didn't really have the best of runs in the UFC, a much lesser run than that of Darren Till. He didn't really get in a good ranked position. He lost on split decision to Kevin Holland. I think he lost to Jacoby as well. They're kind of the only notable names in which he really fought. He had a decent bit of time in Cage Warriors where, he'd win some and then he'd lose some, so, nothing too crazy. he's an all right, fighter. Like I say, he's had a few good moments in his career, but inevitably, I think he has been hurt, and that he showcased that he's been hurt. And I think that Darren Till is going to be able to stop him within 2 rounds. I think he's going to stop him via TKO in round two. I think it could be a very good performance from Darren Till. I think it could yet again showcase his boxing skills. I think Stewart hasn't, got the worst of striking ability. I think he can punch and he is a strong, muscular guy, but inevitably, I've seen him get rocked in a few fights. He's not been knocked out in too many occasions, but when it goes to priority, when it is just priority kind of boxing, I think it is going to be too much for him. And I believe this is his first boxing fight as well. And so, inevitably, like I say, I think Darren Till is going to be able to stop him and, carry on the hype in which he has. And to be fair, I mean, realistically, Tommy Fury knows that Darren Till is a fight in which he kind of needs for his career, and it was so surprising to see that Tommy Fury pulled out of that fight because, Fury went on to fight just the other day in Hungary and nobody really cared and he didn't look amazing. And he couldn't stop a guy who was, a much inexperienced fighter who hadn't really done anything too much in his career, and he wasn't really that skilled. And Tommy Fury couldn't stop him, and it wasn't a great performance. And he knows that Fury is gonna be really difficult for Fury to get paydays into the actual professional scene. So when he goes away and is trying to have these type of fights and saying that he's gonna be a professional boxer and gonna try and work his way back up, it's he knows it's not going to work, and that's why he was saying that before the fight against the guy in Hungary. But then after the fight, he was calling out Jake Paul because he knows that he's not good enough to fight professional boxing, and he's not going to make it to a highly paid world title level. And he knows that Jake Paul is the only kind of real way to make money, but he's probably not going to get a rematch with Jake Paul at this point. And, he's already beaten him. Like, yes, perhaps that could fuel certain fighters to want to get the rematch, but I just don't think it's something that's really that necessary. I think Jake Paul could be on to better things. Maybe he'll do it, but I think Darren Till fight could be still a relatively good payday from Misfits because they are the guys who will pay well. And that could be a good fight, and it could be, if he wins that one, then maybe he could strike a claim for them to go on to fight Jake Paul. But I think a Darren Till fight is a really necessary fight, and the way that he pulled out with it, saying that he's actually like fearful that Till was going to kick him or something like that, was just stupid. And so, hopefully we'll see him versus Fury next, but I just doubt it, to be honest. Moving on to now Ty Mitchell versus Idris Virgo. This is in the pro boxing misfits scene. There's a few people on this card in that scene, and this is a pure pro boxing fight, and it's finally Idris Virgo, trying to go back into the pro scene again. It's been a while since he's fought there, and Ty Mitchell, it's been realistically even longer for him since he's fought there. He fought there in 2011 and he had a few fights professionally, and then he had his fight on Misfits last time against a white collar boxer who he managed to stop quite well, nothing too crazy but stopped quite well. And then Idris Virgo has been having a few decent fights. I mean, he won the tournament in which they did where he had to have 2 fights on one night, but I mean, he beat Fez Batista, who's awful, and then he beat Benson Henderson, former UFC champion, which wasn't a bad victory. He looked better than than Fez Batista did, but inevitably that is a aging man who is way past the prime of his career. I mean, Benson Henderson became UFC champion back in like 2012, so that was where he was at the height, and he was a really good UFC champion, but it wasn't going to work when he came to boxing. He did well to beat Chris Avila, to be fair, Henderson, but inevitably, Virgo was just that bit too much for him. But in a way of this fight, I think it is a good contest. I think Virgo didn't look amazing in the contest versus Henderson. I don't think he was. I think he was making it a bit scrappy unnecessarily. I think he isn't a bad boxer, but again, he can smother his work quite a lot. Whereas Ty Mitchell's a bit of the opposite, to be honest. I think he's a very, fundamentally gifted fighter who can fight well on the outside and just fling out his jab. He's got a low guard, he's a confident fighter, but he's got decent head movement, and he's comfortable on the back foot, and he showcased that in his last performance against a guy who was just windmilling. But when he actually decided to turn it up and try and get his opponent out of there, it wasn't the best of actually disciplined displays. It was quite wild himself, and when he was throwing hooks and varying up his striking, it wasn't, it was just, like I say, a bit wild, a bit wide, and it looked like he could stop him at any point, but again, the opponent wasn't anything too crazy. But like I say, he's got a good jab, and when he lands it, it's good, it's sharp, it's clean, it's quite fast, and he's got a good trainer in Clifton Mitchell backing him as well. I'm going to say that Ty Mitchell's going to be able to win. I think he could easily just, try and make it a bit of a boring fight. I think Virgo rushes in a bit too much, and if Mitchell can use his movement, he can have success. Perhaps Virgo might be able to smother him a bit and cause him to get frustrated a bit, but inevitably, I think that Mitchell, like I say, can catch him with his jab coming in and can go on to win via a scrappy decision. Nothing too crazy, realistically, nothing too entertaining. Moving on to now Chase Demore versus Tank Tolman. Again, this is a fight in which is a well-known Misfits name in Chase Demore, but he's been going away in Mexico, I believe, and having a few contests. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, when Chase Demore first started in Misfits, he was awful. He fought Bruckner, and that was a crazily bad performance where he was just wafting his hands around, didn't really look like he knew what he was doing. He has improved a bit. I mean, he had that disqualification thing, which was really just unnecessary when he was punching after knocking his opponent down. But like I said, I think he's improved a bit. I like how he now moves his hands, far away whenever he knocks his opponent down. But like I say, he still throws with his head very much in the air, very much his chin just completely in the air, and just wafts shots still a bit. But there's a bit more behind it now. It seems like he's a bit more coordinated in that aspect. And Tank Tolman, I really don't know too much about. I think he's meant to have been somebody who's not had a fight before. Like I said, I really don't know too much about Tank Tolman, but inevitably, I think Demore's going to be able to win. I think it's another fight in which he's going to be able to win, and I respect Chase Demore for wanting to go. He seemingly wants the tough challenges. He's been calling out Roman Fury, and that almost happened. That was arranged to happen on this card, I believe, but obviously that didn't happen. But like I say, I respect him for wanting to go and have challenges where he's just fighting guys in which perhaps nobody really knows too much, just to learn, progress. And that's what, realistically, that's what pro boxing is for a lot of it. To start off with, it's learning, it's progressing. And he did get mocked, he did get memed quite a lot, and I mean, he brings it upon himself, calling himself the GOAT and things like that. But inevitably, he has to learn and he has to develop, and he's willing to do so. So like I say, you got to respect that at least. Moving on to Wally Sharks versus Foxer G, which I think is probably one of the better fights on this card in the way of actual ability. Wally Sharks is, I think he fought on one of the Aiden Ross shows, but I didn't get, there's not much footage of that. But he fought in the fight before that against Ian the Great in the rematch, and that was, a firefight. I mean, he got knocked down on two occasions against Ian the Great. When he got knocked down the first time, you can tell that really affected him, and then he was really struggling for the rest of the round. And then he got knocked down again, and I was thinking perhaps that could be the end, but inevitably he did well to get back up. He recovered, and near the end of the fifth round, I believe it was, right near the end of the fight, he really caused some damage to Dean the Great, and he was non-stop pressure, coming forward, letting his hands go. I think that's what his style is, just pure aggression, not really too much defense. And that's the same as Fox the G, to be completely honest. I think he is very much just non-stop aggression and, like I say, pure just in your face, trying to let his hands go. And I think Fox the G wasn't going to be that when he first stepped into the Misfit scene. He wasn't aiming to be that, but then he went out to, of course, brutally stop that small Spartan J in his first fight with Misfits, and then from then he's kind of seen himself as a bit of a puncher. Then he had that supposed 2v1 where he only ended up fighting Evil Hero, and the other guy that he was meant to be fighting pulled out last minute because he was too scared. So, he won via stoppage in that one very quickly, and that was good. Then he went and fought on the Social Knockout free event where I remember Till fought that guy, and then it all kicked off into a big scrap afterwards. But he went and won on that one. He didn't win via knockout, but he won in impressive fashion. Perhaps not winning via knockout might have done his career a favour, but inevitably I think this will be a firefight back and forth. I think, like I say, Walid Sharks' chin has been tested now. I still don't think his defence has improved too much. I think that Fox G is going to be able to win. Like I said, I think this could be a firefight. It could go to a decision where both guys get knocked down on multiple occasions, or possibly where Wally Sharks could get knocked out. But inevitably, I do think that Fox G is going to be able to win this one. Moving on to Jordan Banjo versus Will Anderson, two guys in which I believe are having their boxing debut, and it's A bit of a random contest. I mean, Jordan Banjo is a radio presenter and is also in Diversity. I think another member of Diversity has fought on Misfits before as well, but it's a dance group. But to be fair, he looks in really good shape. I haven't really seen too much footage of him actually sparring on Instagram or anything, but he looks in really good shape. Anderson's been training, I believe, in the same gym in which Chris Eubank Jr. trains in, but I don't think he's been training with him. But he's a Love Island guy who again hasn't boxed before and hasn't really got too much footage on him actually boxing either, but he's got a little bit more than Banjo. I think that Banjo's going to be able to win. I think he's going to be the bigger guy. I do think he could have an underrated ability about him, but we'll have to wait and see, obviously. And I think Will Anderson, he can throw and he knows how to use his hands, but it's still very square and quite boxy and not quite fluid or anything like that. I think if he gets punched by a big guy, Banjo seemingly is a big guy. I think he's gonna get rocked and probably get hurt. And yes, they are both big guys, but I think Banjo, will be that bit stronger of a guy, and like I say, be able to win that fight. Like I say, this is really not in-depth analysis. This is just me going off some guys on Instagrams, Misfits, yeah. But yeah, moving on to Amir Anderson versus Ernesto Oliveira. This is the one of the two true pro fights in which are just, a pro fighter against a bit of a journeyman. And this, the first one, Amir Anderson, is somebody who's been progressing 2-0 now with Misfits. He had his debut with Misfits. He had his second fight with Misfits, and he's been just fighting really bad fighters. I think he's going to win again, clearly. I don't think he's an amazingly good fighter, but he had a decent-ish amateur record, and, I think he has a bit of potential. But like I say, it's still really interesting to see what's actually happening with these guys who are just actual boxers going through the boxing route just with Misfits, because they're getting more eyes on them, yeah, but when are they actually going to get to a point where they actually fight for a title, and who's going to sanction it, and how's it going to work, and is it going to be a main event? Is it just going to be publicized along the other Misfits fights? Are we going to see Amir Anderson face off against a world champion, where we also see Wakey Wines against some guy that nobody else has ever heard of? Like, is that what we're going to be seeing? Is that how it's going to work? It's weird, but we'll have to wait and see. And then, the other fight, which is similar to this, is Dylan Price versus Kari Mancia. Mancia hasn't really fought anybody too much note. I believe he fought Sosa, who knocked out Jazza Dickens and beat him. No, I think he lost to him actually via split decision, but that's a close fight. So, decent-ish, better name than that of an Ernesto Oliveira, but inevitably, Dylan Price, I've interviewed him in the past. I actually think he's a really good fighter. I believe he's 16, 17-0. I think he's a very, very, very talented fighter. I respect, and I'm glad that he's getting this recognition, because he is, like I say, a really talented fighter in and about to be in a really good position in his career. But I just like to hope that Misfits are smart and guide him smartly, because he really could be in for a chance to actually fight for a world title. But like I say, I don't know how it's going to work. Like I say, we'll have to wait and see. I'm not writing anything off just yet, but like I say, I'm not entirely sure how it's going to work. But I think he's going to win his fight as well in his first Misfits fight. Moving on to Joey Knight versus Andrew Howson. This is Knight on his return after fighting Lil Cray Cray and losing. That wasn't the best of performances by him. He was just chasing him around the ring for the most part. Cray Cray didn't really want to engage too much, but inevitably that just helped him get the win. He was quite explosive, and he was either he was one of the fights where his opponent in Cray Cray was either really inside or really outside, so it was quite hard to actually time with his shots, and Knight had to deal with that in his Misfits kind of scene yet. He's not actually had to fight anybody of too good a note, and he struggled, and he couldn't really slow him down, and he seemingly was getting into his groove a bit in the final round, but inevitably it was too much too late, and well, too little too late, I mean. And now he's in against Andrew Howson, who is a Muay Thai fighter. I believe he's had one fight in one championship, or maybe more than that, but he's an English Muay Thai fighter who has had over 100 fights, I believe. He's fought all over in Muay Thai, and he's 45 years of age now, I think, and he has had some really good moments in Muay Thai and been able to become a world champion in different organizations, and nothing too crazy, too major, but inevitably, like I say, is a very skilled Muay Thai fighter, and Muay Thai is a very, very difficult fighting skill to really learn, and he's done well to learn that. And to do it in England where there really isn't too much of a push in Muay Thai, it's impressive. But like I say, he is 45 years of age. He hasn't really boxed properly before. Even he will say himself he's only just kind of learning boxing himself. I think that Joey Knight is a skilled boxer, and I don't think that Andrew Housen is going to be able to move anywhere near as well as what Cray was moving, just through the lack of youthfulness in his not on his side. So I think that Joey Knight's going to be able to win this one as well. Moving on to the kind of customary, if that's even the right way of putting it, fighting, which is just kind of a jokey type fight that's always on a Misfits card, and that is Wakey Wines versus Modine. Modine always brings the interesting fights whenever he's fought. He's fought quite a few just brawl type fights in which they're just scrappy, messy, ugly, weird. And he's fighting now Wakey Wines, who everybody knows him back in the day for his little TikTok, I believe in 2020, when he was selling Prime in his corner shop. But inevitably this is going to be a weird fight. It's gonna, like I say, play out weirdly. Wakey Wines is learning how to box from Liam Cameron, which, to be fair, is a good name to learn how to box from. But I think it's Modine has had a few more fights. I think if Wakey Wines gets punched, he's gonna really not know what to do. Plus, I also think it's going to be a blowout. I think they're both going to be slugging it out, but inevitably I think Modine's going to have a better first round. I don't think it's going past the first round because I don't think either of them will be able to make it past the first round, and then I think Modine's going to be able to win just because, like I said, I've seen him been able to scrap, not well, but I was seeing that he wants to let his hands go at least in a fight, and he can do that. But yeah, now moving on to the final fight, in which I'm going to be talking about the final fight in the card. It's the 1v1v1v1, and it's in the heavyweight division. It's Temple Arts versus Big Tobes versus Godson versus Curtis Pritchard. It's always an interesting concept, this one. I think we may have seen it once before, but I can't remember who the 1v1v1v1 guys were. Oh no, it was Nick Lamau, Alex Wasabi was on it, I believe, and then I can't remember the other two guys. But yeah, that played out all right. And now we've got it again in the heavyweight scene. This might make it more interesting. I don't really know how it works completely. I don't know the whole rule set. If one guy knocks out another guy, which could happen really easily in the heavyweight division, does that mean that the whole fight ends? I don't really know. So I don't really know how I pick a winner, to be honest. I think Godson got knocked out by Temple Arts in the first round when they fought. Temple Arts fought to chase the Murr and arguably lost, but he didn't. He kept the belt. Temple Arts in his last fight fought and won via, I believe, late stoppage. So he still technically is the UFC champion. I don't know. Big Tobes, yeah, I'm not entirely sure what he did. I know he's had a couple fights. I think he's 0-2 in Misfits, so that's not the best of runs. And Curtis Pritchard, I don't think he's had a boxing fight yet. So I'm interested to see how good he is. He's a Love Island guy as well, and he's a bit more of a bigger name than the other Love Island guy in in Will Anderson. So maybe he might offer something a bit interesting, but inevitably I think if it is going to play out in somewhat of an ordinary way, I expect Temple Arts to win because I think he is the best boxer. I think it probably could be the contest in Temple Arts versus Curtis Pritchard because I don't think Big Tobes or Godson are going to be able to offer too much, especially not Godson. Big Tobes maybe, but inevitably, like I say, I think Temple Arts is going to be able to win. How, I have no idea because, like I say, I'm not entirely sure how it's all going to play out, but inevitably, like I say, I think Temple Arts is going to be able to win whenever he is allowed in the ring. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like video if you did need like video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.